Good evening. I'm Richard Bierschbach. I'm the Dean of Wayne State Law School, and we're so excited to have you all here with us tonight. Tonight, we proudly welcome Spencer Overton to our campus and home to Detroit. One core part of our identity here at the law school and at the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights is to try to build connections between our community and the civil rights leaders and movement of the past. And that's part of what tonight's about. That's a big part of tonight. And I want to take just a moment to tell you a few things about the law school that we're proud of and that contribute to that effort on a daily basis. And really one big one is just our location here in the heart of Detroit. We're here at a transformative time for the city right now, but we've been here for a long time. And throughout that time, being in Detroit has given our students access to the kind of hands-on experience in public interest in civil rights with real impact, serious, palpable impact that is very hard to get anywhere else. And that's something that's very meaningful to us. Of course, we try to give them that experience in other fields as well, ranging from corporate law to intellectual property to economic development, whatever it may be. And whenever we do, we try to connect it to the city. And we're proud of being a part of the recovery and the transformation of the city. As part of that, we're also proud that we do everything we can to make sure that every student who walks across the stage at our commencement graduates with the tools that they need to make a difference and without a debt that will really break the bank. And for 4 years in a row, Wayne State Law School has been recognized as a best value law school by the National Jurist and by its sister publication, Pre-Law Magazine. I've seen the law school ranked as high as number 7 nationally in terms of best value law schools, and rankings like that are designed to recognize law schools whose graduates have excellent chances, not only of passing the bar, but of having a meaningful, fulfilling career without coming out encumbered with the sort of financial burden that's going to constrain their ability to go on and do good. And so we see that as a core part of our mission, because if we can get the best and the brightest of Detroit to come to Wayne Law and can get the best and the brightest from around the country to come to Wayne Law in Detroit, we can have a big impact on the city. And in that regard, one opportunity of which we're especially proud is the Damon J. Keith Scholarship. And that's a scholarship that provides substantial tuition support for students to attend Wayne Law. Many of our Damon J. Keith scholars are here tonight. Many of them, like Judge Keith, attended Detroit public schools and historically black colleges and universities. I'd like to ask any of the scholars who are here tonight to please stand so we can recognize you. If you're a Damon J. Keith scholar, please stand up. We're proud to be the home of the Keith Center, the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights, which was founded at the law school in 2011 to honor the life and the legacy of Judge Keith by carrying out his vision for civil rights through our programs and through our students, who are really going to be the civil rights advocates of the future. And we're proud that as part of the Keith Center, we're also home to the Detroit Equity Action Lab, known as DEAL, which is a special initiative of the Keith Center and which promotes racial equity and justice by bringing together diverse intergenerational groups of leaders, of innovators, of community organizers who work to address issues of structural racism. DEAL was established in 2014, and since its establishment, it's convened 3 cohorts, creating a network of more than 80 people representing 75 organizations that deploy diverse methods to end structural racism. And in January, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation awarded Wayne State University $2.4 million to expand the program and continue to pursue the work of DEAL because they think the work is so important and meaningful. This is the second grant we've received from the Kellogg Foundation, bringing the total to $3.9 million invested in ending structural racism here in Detroit, but also across the country. Yeah, I think that's worth a round of applause. A big force behind that effort is someone who we're also immensely proud of, and that's the director of the Damon J. Keith Center, Wayne Law faculty member, Professor Peter Hammer. Just this week, thank you. Just this week, we officially named Professor Hammer the inaugural A. Alfred Taubman Endowed Chair at Wayne State University Law School. I think many of you might know Mr. Taubman passed away in 2015. He was a dear friend of Judge Keith's. He was instrumental in the construction of the Keith Center building, and we're honored to celebrate his legacy and his friendship with Judge Keith with this appointment of Professor Hammer to the chair. We think it's fitting that the first person to receive the title of Taubman Chair is someone who's at the forefront of civil rights initiatives at Wayne Law and who really lives and breathes and embodies the mission of the Keith Center. So please join me again in thanking and in welcoming the director of the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights and our new A. Alfred Taubman Endowed Chair, Professor Hammer.
So good evening. See, I love being in Detroit, right? You go around the world and you don't get the same reaction and warmth when you get that greeting. Thank you so much for coming tonight. It's wonderful to see old and new friends. Fun to see people from some of the students, younger undergraduates, which is great because we got to get this to be a multi-generational lesson. But welcome to the 7th Damon J. Keith Biennial Lecture, generously supported by Comerica Bank. The mission of the Keith Center, as the Dean was saying, is easy to say but quite difficult to fulfill. We strive to do justice to the life and legacy of Judge Damon J. Keith, but to do so in a contemporary setting. We certainly want to know the judge's history, but I keep asking my students to say, what would Judge Keith do today in Detroit if he was a law student? What would Judge Keith do today if he was a young lawyer? And it's that perspective and inspiration that we try to take to address new challenges. The Keith Center takes very seriously the belief that structural racism is a civil rights challenge of our generation, and that Detroit really is ground zero of that struggle, and therefore we have a particularly specific obligation. I tell my students that we are the new Selma of the structural racism struggle, and that we have to act with the awareness and the responsibility that that historic obligation entails. And here at the Keith Center, we do our best to struggle in that direction, recognizing that there aren't necessarily clear answers, clear strategies, and the law is not behind us. But then I remind them that was a situation that Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall faced when they wanted to deal with the 14th Amendment and were told you can't do that because of Plessy versus Ferguson. We can't accept those answers as real. The Keith Center, we've introduced new courses to train the next generation of civil rights lawyers. We teach courses on reimagining development in Detroit. We teach courses on race law and social change in Southeast Michigan. And we teach a course called the Collaborative Study of Structural Racism to get the students out of the building and dealing with people in the community that are making this struggle. With the generous support, as you heard from the Kellogg Foundation, we're running the Detroit Equity Action Lab, saying there's not enough to be on campus. We got to be engaged in the community and take our leadership from community. We have learned so much by working with people and listening to them and being instructed about the issues in Detroit from their life experience and their expertise, even if they don't hold degrees and are graduates of major universities. We're also committed to public educational programs and addressing vital issues like racial equity and the future of work. We're incredibly grateful for Comerica Bank for their support of the speaker series. We're excited to welcome Spencer Overton, who you hear more about, and get a more specific introduction. But I want to celebrate the lecture series. You get moments to reflect, and I've gone back and looked at our former speakers going back over the years, and it's an amazing who's who of experts, of leaders, of visionaries in civil rights. We had Professor Lonnie Guinier, former Keith clerk as well, graduate or first African-American woman to be a tenured law professor at Harvard Law School. We've had the luminary Professor Derek A. Bell. We've had Ted Shaw. We've had Constance Rice. We've had Harry Belafonte. We've had Julian Bond. And we're living in that same tradition now, as you'll hear later, with Spencer Overton. But back to you, Dean, and thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you, Professor Hammer. Our next speaker is Wayne State University President M. Roy Wilson. Since assuming the leadership of the university in 2013, President Wilson has made enormous strides in moving the university forward and upward to the next level. Among many other things, he realigned the university's numerous research divisions to emphasize team science and cluster hiring of scientists, an effort that's reflected in the iBio Multidisciplinary Research Facility, which opened in 2015 and which some of you may have seen just up the street on Woodward. He also developed a strategy to improve the pipeline of underrepresented students in the biomedical sciences. And as part of that strategy, he formed a coalition of Detroit-based universities and colleges to launch the NIH-funded Building Infrastructure Leading to Diversity program at the university in 2015. As part of a plan to increase the diversity of Wayne State's campus, President Wilson also created the position of Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer in 2014, and he also established a separate office, the Office of Multicultural Student Engagement, to foster an inclusive environment and to promote initiatives that encourage academic success for underrepresented minorities and historically marginalized students. I've been in this job 13 months now, and I can attest from personal experience that President Wilson is a dedicated supporter of the law school and of the Keith Center, and that we couldn't be doing the good work that we're doing here without that support. So please join me in both thanking and welcoming to the podium President M. Roy Wilson.
Well, thank you very much, Dean. I can see that from now on I need to pay more attention to the entire flow of things so we can delete unnecessary introductions and things like that. But let me just also join in thanking all of you for being here tonight. I know that many of you were not at the dinner that we just came from, so let me acknowledge my wife, Jacqueline, who's here both at the dinner and here now. And also at the dinner, the dean started off his comments by talking about how honored he was to be among such distinguished jurists and attorneys and other legal types. And I was kind of sitting there as a physician and a surgeon at that, just thinking, how I never would have dreamed of being so comfortable with so many lawyers in the room, just all lawyers. But, I thought, well, these are all good people, so it's all good. Judge Keith was not able to be with us today. I'm so looking forward to seeing him, but I do want to thank Judge Eric Clay for coming here on behalf of Judge Keith and offering some comments on his behalf. I also just want to say that, the thing about Judge Keith is that everyone that he touches feels that they and they alone have a special relationship with him. So I know all of you know what I'm talking about. So I am just so honored to say that since my arrival here at Wayne State, Judge Keith has become my best friend and someone I greatly admire. But certainly on a serious note, I think everybody knows that he really is a very special man who holds a ironclad conviction that liberty and justice for all shouldn't be just a concept, but a reality. And he spent really an illustrious career on the bench defending and enforcing it. We're grateful not only for his contributions to this great city, but also certainly to Wayne State. What he has accomplished and what he has stood for are so vital to us all in our country, and forever we will be indebted for his bold actions on behalf of equality. Perhaps the best tribute we can pay to his great work is to carry on in spirit and action his really deep commitment to equal justice for all. And that's why certainly we established the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights, as well as this biennial lecture in his honor. 7 years ago, we celebrated the opening of the Keith Center, and in that time, it's really become a locus for addressing civil rights issues, particularly in Southeast Michigan, but also beyond. And here on campus, it's a place for civil rights teaching, research, and action, and it's a place of inspiration and learning that's fueling the next generation of civil rights leaders. And in that vein, I also want to add my congratulations to the Keith Scholars who we acknowledged earlier and the Dean also mentioned just now. I also just want to thank Comerica Bank for sponsoring this evening's event. We're very grateful for their support. And I'm particularly excited about our featured speaker this evening, Spencer Overton. I happen to know that he's grew up in both Detroit and I think, if I'm right, I think it was somewhere like in the suburbs of Detroit. Yeah, Southfield, okay. But so I knew that because I read that somewhere, Detroit and Southfield. But what I didn't know until this evening is that his parents both went to Wayne State. So, you know, we want to also indirectly claim him because, without his parents, he wouldn't have been here, and without Wayne State, his parents would, so with that, let me just conclude and just mention that Jacqueline and I would love to stay for the lecture, but we do have an 8 o'clock, another event that we have to go to at 8 o'clock, so we're going to have to leave. But again, thank you all for being here and being a part of this. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, President Wilson. Our next speaker is native Detroiter Michael Cheatham. While attending the University of Michigan, Mr. Cheatham was a member of the Army Reserve. After college, he joined Comerica Bank and he spent 19 years working in the banking center system. During that time, he also earned an MBA, and he now serves as the bank's Corporate Contributions and Community Reinvestment Act manager for the state of Michigan. He's very active in the community. He serves on the board of directors for several area nonprofits and community-focused professional associations. He joins us this evening to give remarks on behalf of our sponsor, Comerica, whose generous gift has supported the Damon J. Keith Biennial Lecture Series going back to 2008. So please welcome Michael Cheatham. Michael, thank you.
I'd like to meet that guy you all were talking about. Good evening, I am Michael Cheatham, and I serve as Comerica's statewide corporate contributions manager, but I also have the privilege of being responsible for our community reinvestment activities here in Metro Detroit. On behalf of our market president, Mike Ritchie, and my colleagues here tonight, I would like to welcome you to what promises to be a very timely and thought-provoking conversation with our native son, Spencer Overton, president of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. If you're a Comerica customer, I'd like to say thank you for your business, and we look forward to continuing to serve you in the coming years. If you're not a customer, we hope to get to know you better. And to that end, I'd like to have my colleagues that are here with me to stand and be recognized. You all are here, stand up. Feel free to speak with them after the lecture to talk about how Comerica can contribute to your success. We're proud to be sponsors of the lecture series and similar events as they reflect our continuing commitment to education, to diversity, and the community at large. We believe that our community is strengthened when there is a greater awareness of, respect for, and sensitivity to diversity. So we want to thank Wayne State, a jewel in this city. We want to thank the Damon J. Keith Center for providing this platform, and thank you to you, the audience, for your attendance tonight. Enjoy the lecture.
Thank you, Mr. Cheatham. Before I introduce our next speaker, I want to echo President Wilson and say a few words about the reason we're all here tonight, and that's Judge Damon J. Keith. Last year, as you all know, Judge Keith celebrated 50 years on the federal bench. 50 years. And on July 4th of this year, he turned 96 years old. For more than 50 years, he has persuasively and movingly defended the Constitution as a bulwark of civil liberties for all people. For all people. For some of the students in this room, Judge Keith is the reason they came to law school, and specifically for some of them to this law school. He's the inspiration behind what they want to do with their lives, and he's really an inspiration for all of us. This past spring, we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the Damon J. Keith Scholarship and our annual alumni magazine. I'd like to quote one of the students we featured in that issue, Keith scholar Monique Eubanks. She said, "Judge Keith is proof that we all can achieve the unimaginable. The Damon J. Keith Scholarship afforded me the opportunity to attend law school, and it's a continuous reminder that the doors have been opened for me to accomplish my biggest dreams." Now, while he couldn't be here with us tonight, please join me in a round of applause for Judge Keith. Thank you. It's now my honor to introduce Judge Eric Clay, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Like so many here tonight, Judge Clay is a former clerk of Judge Keith, and he then went on to join him on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Last year, when we celebrated Judge Keith's 50th anniversary on the bench, Judge Clay said the following to the Detroit News. He said, "Once you've worked as a law clerk for the judge or become a fixture in his circle as a close friend, you become in perpetuity a member of the Keith family, a network of people with shared values characterized by a desire to contribute to the well-being of their community and society as a whole." And I really can't think of a better way to express what this evening is about. And I can't think of anyone better to welcome our speaker here tonight than Judge Clay. Judge Clay.
Good evening. I'm here this evening, of course, to introduce Professor Spencer Overton. Before I proceed with that, however, I'd like to read to you a statement that I was given by Judge Keith with the request that I share these remarks of his with you this evening. And Judge Keith sends all of you these greetings. Regretfully, due to unforeseen circumstances, I will not be able to attend with you this evening, but I wish to share with you the following remarks. Dr. Wilson, Peter Hammer, Gary Spicer, Professor Blanche Cook, and those of you gathered for this very special occasion, thank you for being here tonight to celebrate the Damon J. Keith Center 7th Biennial Lecture. We are honored to have Detroit's own Professor Spencer Overton as our keynote lecturer this evening. Spencer has garnered national acclaim in the field of law and heads one of the nation's most essential black think tanks, the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. He is a prolific thinker, an innovative leader, and a crusader for justice in his own right. He also happens to be one of my former law clerks. You are in for a treat this evening with a smile. I would like to, and believe me, I didn't ask him to put this in. I would like to thank my dear friend, Judge Eric L. Clay, who I have the pleasure of sitting with on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, for his willingness to give remarks on my behalf. I am honored to serve alongside him on the nation's second highest court in the land, and he too is a former clerk of mine. I also want to acknowledge my personal lawyer, advisor, and close friend, Alex Parrish, Alex, a senior partner at the law firm of Heinemann, Miller, Schwartz & Cohn, has been singled out as one of the best lawyers in the country, and you guessed it, he is also a former law clerk of mine. As I have always said, my law clerks are going to make me famous. Lastly, I want to give a special note of thanks to Peter Hammer, the director of the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights. Peter has brought honor, prestige, and most importantly, finances to the Keith Center. He has done an outstanding job in bringing awareness to the Keith Center, and I congratulate you, Peter, for a job well done. Thank you all for coming tonight, and enjoy your evening. Now, for the introduction of my dear friend, Professor Spencer Overton. In Professor Overton, we have a distinguished American who is our speaker for the evening and is someone very familiar with Detroit, his hometown. The challenge in introducing someone like Spencer is that he has such a lengthy record of accomplishment that many of his achievements have to be omitted in order to do the introduction within a reasonable time frame. Let me say at the outset that I have a bond with and am part of a community of interest with him because we both started our careers as law clerks for the Honorable Damon J. Keith. Of course, I preceded Professor Overton as Judge Keith's law clerk by more years than I would like to acknowledge. In that regard, I first met Spencer Overton when I was practicing with my law firm of Lewis, White, and Clay over in the First National Building. I see here tonight Judge Ulysses Borkin, who I think also got to know Spencer at that time. At that time, Professor Overton was working at the firm as a law clerk intern, but even then, he was no typical intern. And I was so impressed by him that I wrote a letter of recommendation on his behalf to Judge Keith, recommending that the judge hire him as a law clerk, which he did. I don't often get a chance to remind Professor Overton about that letter, so I'm glad to have this opportunity. And Professor Overton has gone on to make Judge Keith exceedingly proud of him because of his contributions in the areas of voting rights and social policy, as a law professor, and as a civil rights leader in his own right. Those of us who started out as law clerks to Judge Keith have heard the judge talk about such things as the value of widening the circle of opportunity for all citizens, including the most vulnerable among us, the value of promoting diversity in education and the workforce, and in vindicating the right to vote. Professor Overton has excelled and been a leader in all of those areas. He is a graduate with honors of both Hampton University and the Harvard Law School. He is the president of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies in Washington, D.C., and is a tenured professor of law at George Washington University. He is also a senior fellow at DEMOS, a member of the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans, and the National Chair of Public Policy for the nation's oldest African American fraternity, Sigma Pi Phi. During the Obama administration, Professor Overton served as Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General of Legal Policy at the Department of Justice, and in several other significant leadership and policy positions at the Department of Justice. I think during the time that Professor Overton was with the Obama administration, he and Eric Holder spent so much time together that they got to know one another better than their own spouses. He has served on many boards and commissions concerned with issues pertaining to voting rights, including service as a commissioner on the Jimmy Carter James Baker Commission on Federal Election Reform and the Board of Advisors of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. He is the author of the book, Stealing Democracy, The New Politics of Voter Suppression, which was published by W.W. Norton, as well as academic articles on education, on election law, which have appeared in several leading law journals. Some of you may have seen Professor Overton in the news in recent days in connection with the study released by his organization regarding the lack of racial diversity on congressional staffs and the impact that has on Congress's legislative process. I understand that Professor Overton's lecture this evening is entitled Racial Equality and the Future of Work. I will leave it to Professor Overton himself to explain the meaning of that title. In Spencer Overton, I introduce you to a worthy inheritor of the legacy of the Honorable Damon J. Keith.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Clay, for that introduction and for that letter. I appreciate that immensely here. So it's great to be home, and it's very special to be at Wayne State. As President Wilson mentioned, both of my parents are graduates. As you all know, Wayne has been central to the economic mobility of African Americans in Detroit, and it's really special to be here. Dean Birchbach, thank you so much for being here and for hosting us, and thank you for building on this legacy and continuing to lead Wayne State into the future. Thanks to all of you for just taking a Friday night and coming out. Michael Cheatham of Comerica, thanks so much for your support. I told you a little earlier, my first memory of a bank was Manufacturers Bank, my mother's bank, Manufacturers Bank, and manufacturers and Comerica have merged, and Comerica has the logo from Manufacturers Bank. I'm also appreciative to see so many friends from various places, from my church at Plymouth UCC, including the First Lady of the church here, Judge Denise Page Hood, from Judge Keith's biological and legal family here, folks like Alex Parrish and Blanche Cook, from the legal and the civic community, people like my best friend Terrence Thomas, and people like my mentor, Mayor Dennis Archer and Judge Archer. Appreciate you all being here. Thanks also to Robert Sedler, who lived his values. I didn't appreciate it back then. He lived his values, and he moved into an integrated neighborhood in the 70s, and I grew up with his son Eric as a very good friend here. Thanks to all my mother's friends who came. I certainly appreciate you stepping up to the plate for her and for me, and also to many of the family members who came out. I want to just take a moment and lift up one family member in particular. My father-in-law, Oris Collins. Oris Collins, you can raise your hand here. You can raise your hand. He's been committed to this community from the beginning. He has 2 degrees from Wayne State, one in math and one in urban planning. He was purchasing director of the city of Detroit under Coleman Young, and really through all the years here, he's been ethical, committed to the city, committed to quality work. He's been incredibly smart, but also just very low-key. He doesn't need to be the center of attention. I'm very thankful to have him as my wife's father, as my father-in-law, and as a wonderful grandfather to my 2 boys. So just on this day, I just want to lift you up and say thank you. Your entire family loves you. Now, I want to turn to another figure that others have talked about, but I want to, even though he's not here, in terms of Judge Keith. As mentioned, he's been instrumental in my life. I was fortunate enough to clerk for him. I learned so much working for him, got a lot of confidence, got really a front row seat to see both good lawyering and bad lawyering in terms of the folks who appeared before us, right? And it also just gave me exposure to how to make decisions that have big consequences. I've gained a lot personally from Judge Keith. It's the 5th day of the month, and this morning I read Proverbs 5 because I learned long ago that Judge Keith has this practice in terms of reading a proverb for every day of the month. I also learned a lot watching his love for his wife, Dr. Rachel Keith, who's also super smart and professionally accomplished in her own right. And 22 years ago, I married the former Leslie Collins at Plymouth United Church of Christ by Nick Hood married us. And so I've gotten a lot out of him both professionally and personally. In my talk today, I want to make 3 points. All these points apply to the nation as a whole, but they have special relevance right here at home, Greg, in Detroit. First, in our history as a nation, work has shaped race, and race has shaped work. Work and race have shaped the world that we experience today. That's point number 1. Point number 2, right now, work is changing. Technology is driving great changes to work, from automation to the gig economy. The meaning of work is changing. Third, the policy decisions we make right now about work will determine whether racial disparities expand in the future or whether we can reduce and eliminate them, right? So to this first point, this work and economics shaping race in the United States, we could tell this story, right, through Judge Keith and his family, right? European demand for sugar and later molasses, rum, tobacco, rice, indigo, right, drove the desire for cheap labor in the New World. And the legal creation of slavery based on race satisfied this demand. Between 1492 and 1776, only 15% of those who survived the crossing of the Atlantic and settled in the New World were European. 85% of those survivors, Ulysses Boykin, were African. As you know, slavery also shaped the original U.S. Constitution that was ratified by the 13th state, Rhode Island, in 1790. And we talk a lot about innovation today, but just 3 years later, after Rhode Island was the 13th state to ratify, right? Innovation, right? Innovation would give this new nation a strong economic foundation that would also increase the demand for black slaves. In 1793, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. It's a machine that sped up the process of removing seeds from cotton fiber. And cotton became the #1 export from the United States. The British textile industry depended on it. The American financial and shipping industries, they depended on cotton grown by slaves, right? And this expanded the demand for slaves to work in cotton fields. And by 1850, 70% of the slaves working in agriculture were on cotton plantations. Right? Now, according to Trevor Coleman and Peter Hammer's book on Judge Keith's father and mother had parents who were slaves. I'm saying Judge Keith had grandparents who were slaves. I'm not talking about, 18 generations ago. I'm talking about grandparents here, right? Innovation continued throughout the 1800s and after the Civil War and the Reconstruction Amendments. The continuing Industrial Revolution started to automate farming and reduce the demand for labor while increasing the demand for labor in factories, particularly in urban areas. This innovation shifted wealth and opportunity and led to the Great Migration, Pam. And in 1915, Judge Keith's father, Perry Keith, migrated from Atlanta to Detroit for Henry Ford's $5 a day wages. 2 years later, his wife, Annie Keith, and their 5 children came to Detroit. And 5 years after that, Judge Keith was born on July 4th, 1922. Now, despite these new opportunities in the North, in Detroit, race was used to preserve a cheap pool of talented black labor for menial jobs and to reserve more lucrative positions for white families. In 1930, for example, Judge Keith's 21-year-old brother, Perry Keith Jr., was a chauffeur. Judge Keith, you all know, attended Howard Law School in the 1940s, where there was a legal revolution afoot that would challenge the racial and economic order. But even though he had a front row seat on that battle, Judge Keith personally experienced the economic implications of this system that relegated blacks to low-wage jobs, right? In 1949, as a graduate of both college and law school who was studying for the bar, right? He was working in a job scrubbing toilets in the Detroit News, right? Throughout his life and his career, he would continuously, personally experience the effects of the relegation of blacks to low-wage jobs. In 1991, while a federal Court of Appeals judge, while serving as the national chairman of the bicentennial of the U.S. Constitution, a hotel guest assumed that Judge Keith was a valet, right? And tossed a 69-year-old Judge Keith his car keys and ordered, "Here, boy, park this car." Right? Judge Keith also grappled with race and economics while he was on the bench. You all know in the Stamps case, this is Detroit Edison kept blacks in jobs like washing cars, chauffeuring, cleaning floors, operating elevators, and used black dots on job applications to identify blacks to keep them out of more lucrative jobs. The labor union was complicit in preserving certain jobs for whites. Judge Keith on the bench ruled against Detroit Edison. He was also at the center of it in cases like Davis versus School District of the City of Pontiac, where Pontiac was about 25% black, but the schools were nearly 100% segregated. Pontiac explained that segregated housing patterns naturally resulted in segregated neighborhood schools. Judge Keith ordered busing to remedy this segregated system. Again, kind of this convergence of economics, housing patterns and values, opportunity, and race. We all know the rest, front row seat, right? Globalization and deindustrialization, flight, blight, racial polarization, political dysfunction, and eroding tax base, and other economic and racial factors that interacted to shape Detroit and, to a certain extent, our country, right? My overall point is whether the demand is for sugar, tobacco, cotton, cheap consumer goods, or good-paying jobs with minimal competition from blacks, work has shaped race, and race has shaped work, right? Along the way, innovation has played a critical role, whether it's the cotton gin, the automobile, or the interstate highway that facilitated flight. And while I use black and white because it's something that many of us live and understand in this metropolitan area, racial equality in economics is not just a black and white story. Manifest destiny in moving across the continent meant that Indian removal was required from much of the country and relegation of communities to reservations. The U.S. obtained California and other territories through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo after a war with Mexico, but the U.S. relegated Latinos who lived in the territories to second-class status. The Bracero programs were used to import Mexican workers on one hand for cheap labor, but Operation Wetback was used to deport them. We've seen a similar phenomenon with Chinese immigrants who are imported as labor, and then the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, right? And there's some things that may be happening today in the country I understand and get reports about here, right? So race and work are interconnected. Now I want to move to my second point, Phyllis. Work is changing right now. We're in the midst of an economic transformation. Technologies they're moving out beyond Silicon Valley, and we're seeing the implications in our everyday lives across the United States, right? Grocery stores, they're installing self-checkout lanes. Manufacturing plants are increasingly using industrial robots. Retail is being transformed by Amazon. Threatened with the emergence of new models like Airbnb and Uber, traditional companies are rushing to reduce costs and increase efficiencies by automating their processes, right? And with Detroit leading the way, driverless trucks, buses, and cars will soon be commonplace. And there are various interacting technologies that are driving this: artificial intelligence, big data, robotics, widespread access, right, to smartphones in terms of us being connected. The Internet of Things, like this Fitbit that's on my wrist that tells me how many more steps I need to take, means that innovation is not just about somebody sitting in a office in Silicon Valley coding who captures something on a screen, but the internet is connecting us to the real world and allowing us to interact with the real world. Now these changes certainly may have benefits to the, consumers, right? I still need to get another 1,500 steps today here, right? But there are also some questions. With the new self-checkout lanes at the grocery store, what happens to the cashiers? Right? Sure, we can repatriate manufacturing and produce goods for less money than in China, and than producing them in China and shipping them over here, right? But what if we no longer need 500 workers to do that, but only 50 due to automation? What do autonomous vehicles mean for truck drivers, for bus drivers, for taxi drivers, for chauffeurs, right? Right now, the common discussion about this, about technology and work, is limited, right? One extreme argues that robots will replace workers, and that this will either mean mass unemployment and poverty, or that we'll all get a check from the government and we'll just have a lot more leisure time while robots feed us grapes and attend to our every need, right? Like that's one vision, right? The other camp says that just as the reduction in agricultural jobs, right, during the Industrial Revolution was met by an increased demand for work in factories, the argument is there'll be many new jobs and increased growth in the economy. I think this existing debate is limited because it doesn't take into account what we've talked about in my first point, this relationship between work and race, right? We could have overall economic growth, but we could also have increased racial inequality, right? So, for example, the current changes in technology could have a significant impact on black workers. My organization, the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, we found that 27% of all black workers in the United States are concentrated in just 30 jobs at high risk to automation. So let me just say this. Bureau of Labor Statistics, they track like 700 jobs, right? 700 jobs that various folks are in. Over a quarter of black folks are in just 30 jobs that are at high risk to automation, right? So for example, compared to white workers, black workers are 1.5 times more likely to be cashiers, cooks, and fast food workers. Black workers are over 3 times more likely than white workers to be bus drivers, taxi drivers, chauffeurs, and security guards. These jobs, to which we've often been relegated, even that may no longer exist, right? And even at full employment, right now, black unemployment rates are almost twice as high as white unemployment rates, right? And the displacement, we found that if we were to displace just half of these black folks who are in these 30 jobs, abuela, right? If we were to displace just half of them, that would triple the African American unemployment rate to over 20%. So if we do nothing, automation could increase racial disparities. Now, this doesn't all just cut one way, right? Economic disruption will both eliminate jobs and will create new jobs. So for example, e-commerce companies like Amazon reduce the sales and the number of employees at traditional retail stores, right? And this is a big source of employment for black folks, particularly young black people. On the other hand, Amazon creates new jobs by hiring workers at fulfillment centers and other parts of its distribution network. Michael Williams, your namesake, Michael Mandel at PPI, the Progressive Policy Institute, found that from 2007 to 2016, the general retail sector lost 50,000 jobs, but that Amazon added, or I'm not saying, not just Amazon, the e-commerce sector added 350,000 jobs. The question, though, is how can we ensure Detroiters are getting a healthy number of those new jobs? Right? How can we ensure that e-commerce retailers build a healthy number of fulfillment centers in places like Detroit, right? Autonomous vehicles are another area of opportunity. On one hand, it's possible that black drivers will lose jobs here, and we need to be concerned about that. But we also have to deal with this problem of lack of transportation. It's one of the most significant barriers to employment by black folks is a lack of transportation to work. And if autonomous vehicles are properly deployed, presumably they could reduce the cost of transportation and provide the mobility black communities need to get to work, right? Now, there are those who would argue that race is irrelevant to the future of work. They'd say, hey, this isn't a racial issue. It's exclusively about low-income Americans or less educated Americans who lack skills, right? So here's why that's wrong for a number of reasons. Number one, automation is going to affect other people. You know, these folks will be hit the hardest, but certainly like radiologists, a machine, AI, does that better than the radiologist today, right? Accountants, financial planners, there's some people who are trained who are at risk to automation, right? But then there's this other piece where it's not just about low income and it's not just about low education. Black workers face unique challenges that make them particularly vulnerable during labor market transitions. Implicit bias in evaluation and hiring makes it more difficult for black workers to transition to new jobs. You all have seen the studies about Jamal, right, versus someone who does not have a black name, and Brett, thank you. So, limited social networks, right, make finding new jobs and finding out about new jobs more difficult for black workers. Residential segregation and transportation challenges mean that a lot of folks don't live near where the jobs are. Right? We talked about that. Median household net worth that's 1/10 that of whites. So I'm not talking about income, I'm talking about net worth, right? That means that when you're unemployed for a while and you got to make ends meet, it's difficult to make ends meet because you don't have the net worth. You can't take out an additional mortgage on your house or something to that effect to make ends meet. Duke economist Sandy Darity also talks about this. He says the very reason blacks have been traditionally relegated to many of the low-paying jobs, the cooks, the fast food workers, the retail sales, the drivers, right? These that'll be the first to be automated is because of discrimination. He says it's the discrimination that presumably kept a Judge Keith mopping bathroom floors at the Detroit News as a graduate of law school, right? And the implicit bias that presumably caused the gentleman to toss him some keys 40 years later and assume he was a valet. This is the reason, or one of the reasons, that people are in these jobs that are at high risk to automation in the first place, right? So now, some of your friends may say, why should we care about race in the future of work? They may not say it to your face, or maybe they're good friends and they do say it to your face, but they may say, hey, why should we care about this? We're all concerned about putting food on the table. We shouldn't make any special effort to deal with this. Here's why that's wrong. Eliminating racial disparities helps everybody. It helps the nation as a whole. It expands the skilled workforce. It ensures companies have the talent they need to be productive. It makes the U.S. more competitive globally. And this is real money. You all may have seen the Kellogg Foundation report that showed that eliminating discriminatory practices in Michigan alone, this is just in Michigan, would yield an additional $8 billion in consumer spending per year, and that state and local governments would receive an additional $1.5 billion in tax revenues. And as Rip Rapson of the Kresge Foundation and Amy Liu of Brookings wrote recently, places with high racial exclusion experience slower economic growth and squandered talent and entrepreneurial growth. Right? So it hurts everybody. Right? Now, I can hear some of my friends, some of these are my critical race nationalist friends here, many of them African Americans here, skeptical about the future of work and innovation. They may believe that increased racial disparities are an inevitable consequence of innovation, that this thing is just happening no matter what we do. Look, they say, you know, we started off by you saying we were 85% of the people who survived the voyage, and that was back when we could be used as slaves. Now we're only 13% of the population, and automation threatens to take the few low-paying jobs we had before, right? Just like Native Americans have dwindled to just 1% of the US population, others will not invest in our communities but just confine us to reservations with limited opportunities and let us wither on the vine over time. And I understand this perspective. To be, very personal, I came to the first Crane's homecoming a few years ago. And I was initially impressed. Detroit came out of bankruptcy in just a year. It's attracted $7 billion in private market investments. It's reframed its image as a strong, scrappy, creative, innovative city. But when I talked to a few of my friends about this, at least two of them are in this room. I won't point any fingers. Right? They noted that black entrepreneurs were not at the table. They weren't in the loop. Much of the growth and prosperity is enjoyed by new residents in the central business district rather than neighborhoods and communities around the city. And no doubt the entire city benefits from an enhanced tax base and supporting jobs. But the vast majority of Detroiters don't want to indirectly benefit from growth or be bit players in their own hometown, right? And I thought about it. My friends were right. There weren't a lot of black entrepreneurs featured. And there are a lot of neighborhoods that have not seen growth, right? But I still don't think increased inequality is an inevitable component of innovation, even though my friends have legitimate points about that. One of the reasons many of us love the movie Black Panther is because of the Afro-futuristic nation of Wakanda, right? In the movie, Wakanda isn't just some broken country that has to be fixed up according to a Western imperialistic model, right? Some imitation, right? The goal is not to be an imitation of France or the UK or the US, right? Instead, Wakanda is a significantly more prosperous, innovative, and technically advanced nation, right? And this powerful concept is not just in comic books, right? In real life, black workers have discerned, right? They've discerned the future and strategically positioned themselves for relevance and success, right? Julie Boykin, Hamptonians, right? Black female NASA mathematicians, right? People like Dorothy Vaughan, depicted in the movie Hidden Figures, speculated that an incoming IBM computer would displace her team of mathematicians in the 1960s. So what did she do? She learned Fortran, right? And she didn't just learn it herself, so she'd be, special, right? She taught Fortran to her entire team, right? And when they brought the IBMs in there, right, the NASA black female mathematicians were prepared to take over new jobs operating the IBM, right? We also see the same thing happening in other parts of the world. When Judge Keith was appointed to the federal bench Singapore and South Korea were developing countries which some would call third world, right? Through strategic planning, focused effort, capital investment, and investment in the education and skills of their people, Singapore is now the financial center of Asia. South Korea is home to leading companies like Samsung. In 1991, when the man threw his keys at Judge Keith, Estonia became free of Soviet occupation. It was in tatters and ruins. Food was rationed. Inflation skyrocketed to over 1,000%. In 1992, a 32-year-old historian was elected prime minister, and he focused on fostering an innovative business culture. Only half of Estonians had telephone service, and rather than just install an analog telephone system, they leapfrogged straight to a digital network that was designed for them. Every school in Estonia was online by 1998, and in 2000, Parliament enshrined internet access as a human right. Estonia became a center for global investment. It built an innovation economy, and it produced notable companies. Has anyone heard of Skype, right? It's Estonia, right? Its GDP is now 15 times what it was at the fall of the Soviet Union, right? Now, there'll be some people, they wouldn't say this out loud, but they might say it to me after the conversation here, the discussion. They might say, hey, those aren't black countries. You're talking about some white countries. You're not talking about black countries, right? Rwanda's a black country, right? When I was clerking for Judge Keith in 1994, Rwanda was undergoing a brutal genocide in which 800,000 people were murdered. Since then, Rwanda has rebuilt itself. The objective was for Rwanda to move from an agricultural country and leapfrog the industrial stage and move to a knowledge-based economy. All of Rwanda's 30 districts are now connected with fiber optics. GDP growth has averaged about 8% per year. Gender equality has been a key focus, and women now make up a larger percentage of leaders in the public and private sector in Rwanda than they do in the US. And while inequality has decreased in Rwanda in the last 15 years, in the United States, inequality has increased, right? One of my friends from the Obama campaign, Alec Ross, he wrote a book called Industries of the Future, and he was the tech guy on our campaign, and then he became Secretary Clinton's tech person at the Department of State, and he basically traveled the world looking at these countries, and it's a good book. These numbers come from that. I encourage you to check it out. So this is a key moment in our nation in Detroit. Great change is happening. No one is entrenched. There's a new frontier of opportunity that's not been staked out or claimed by one group. All this goes to my third point, which is depending on policy choices we make right now, racial disparities can grow or they can be eliminated. How do we bake racial equity into the design so it's not just an afterthought, right? We've seen companies like Amazon grow and quickly transform entire industries. We've seen the same thing happen in Singapore, South Korea, Estonia, Rwanda. How can the same thing happen in Conant Gardens in Detroit, where my parents grew up and where I lived until I was 8? How can we turn this disruption into opportunity? These are questions we're trying to work on at the Joint Center. While the purpose of an advocacy group is to respond to the 24-hour news cycle, right? We're trying to think about what the next 5 or 15 years look like, and what's the plan for the next 5 or 15 years. Now, we're just staffing up, and we're starting to think about these questions. We don't have all the answers. Here are some key principles, right? One, skills. Black workers have to acquire new skills that are increasingly in demand locally. Because job openings are highly dependent on locale, what's in demand in Memphis is going to be different than what's in demand in Detroit, right? Local implementation is key. Gotta get, you all probably all know this already, and you're doing a great job probably in Detroit, but some would say in some places, right? Got to coordinate community leaders, local government, employers, labor unions, educational institutions to collectively identify what's in demand and how do we quickly get skills to people in an effective way that works with their lives. How do we have clear pathways to jobs? Another element is what some call shared prosperity here, right? One component is regionalism, recognizing we want to work together, want to have regional transportation plans so that we cultivate skilled talent in Detroit and everyone in the region can benefit from that talent. People can get to work. Also got to develop both the central business district and the neighborhood. And, you know, somebody who really embodies this is Judge Keith. I mean, you think about how many friendships he has in terms of knowing people in different areas of this community. He really embodies that notion. Another thing that's kind of a platitude, but it's just true. Sometimes platitudes are, Stephanie, you know. Lifelong learning, right? Constant innovation means that we got opportunities to get in and folks aren't entrenched, but it also means that things are always changing here. And from manufacturing worker to the accountant to the radiologist, all got to develop, acquire fresh, in-demand skills. We also just mentioned employer accountability, right? Employers that are eager to fill open positions are prone to pointing a finger of blame at the workforce, basically saying, hey, employees are responsible for obtaining the right skills and closing the skills mismatch. I've got the jobs if they just had the skills is the argument, right? And too often companies use this point to deflect responsibility when they automate and they displace existing employees. Companies that benefit from automation should take responsibility, fair share at least of responsibility, create a culture as opposed to just letting folks go, creating a culture that says, look, change is coming. Here's how we're going to help you get some skills if you want to get skills here. And here's how this is going to be financed, right? Another key concept, future of work, it's not 25 years from now, it's now, right? It certainly involves strengthening the educational system for children, right? But sometimes what happens is that people write off parents, right? And that's wrong, right? Nobody wants to hear, okay, well, we're going to just write you off and your kids we're going to take care of, but, you know, your dreams, you don't deserve dreams, right? Nobody wants that, and it's just wrong, right? It's got to be strong K-12, but there also has got to be education and skills training for parents, right? Moving people into $25,000 a year jobs to kind of learn how to interact and socialize with people, and then moving people into skilled jobs that are, you know, $60,000 a year. All of that would have tremendous impact in terms of wealth creation in our community. Also, you need to end Booker T. Washington versus W.E.B. Du Bois debate, right? Economic security, black economic security, it's not this binary choice between trade school versus college or blue collar versus white collar, right? The choice is never mutually exclusive. We definitely have to fight the implicit bias of teachers who treat and track black children you know, away from their full potential. We definitely have to do that. At the same time, right, we deprive millions of black workers' dignity and opportunity if we limit our definition of success to a BA or an MBA. You know, I've got an aunt who has some, you know, successful children and, you know, big degrees and stuff, right? she's incredibly proud of her son who has, had some trouble with drugs and law enforcement, but now he's got his house, he's got his lawn, he takes care of it, he's got his job, he goes to work every day. Like, there's some real dignity in that, and we don't want to undercut or dismiss that or take value away from that, right? So black community has to compete for certainly BAs and PhDs, but also for information technology, advanced manufacturing, and a host of other good jobs that don't require a BA. Entrepreneurship, right? How do we convert these new skills into new businesses? 3D printing, for example, may allow a black business here in Detroit to supply auto parts on demand and immediately, as opposed to them coming from China, right? Robotic bricklaying may empower a black bricklayer to start a business with minimal overhead here. So technology gives rise, Maurice, to new possibilities every day. So it's an incredibly important moment for racial equality. To ignore this opportunity is to risk mass displacement of black workers to automation and expanded racial inequality. We've got to grapple with this question of improving neighborhoods, and it is inextricably tied to the question of the future of work. This is a moment for fresh starts, to create new opportunities, and to disrupt entrenched, race-based, socioeconomic hierarchy. Singapore, Estonia, Rwanda have embraced innovation to leapfrog ahead. We can do the same thing in Detroit, in Gary, in Baltimore, in Memphis, in New Orleans, right? Indeed, Detroit, Peter said, this is ground zero, right? Detroit can lead the nation not just in industry, not just in racial segregation, not just in recovering from municipal debts, right? Detroit can lead the nation in grappling with and improving this relationship between economics and race that we've been struggling with since the beginning of our nation. So thanks for your patience, and I'm open to any quick questions here we've got here. Peter, I don't know how much time we have for questions. Okay. And I said questions, but I really mean comments. We're all in the process of learning, and comments, insight. Certainly both questions and comments shape our work that we're doing. Hello. How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
That's
fine.
good.
One topic you didn't touch on is the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. We all have relatives who have had made mistakes in their early lives, and whether they go to family members or church members. In Michigan, if then you want to get your license, your charges reduced or expunged, it's 5 years minimum.
Right.
And should that, from a statewide or from a national standpoint, be cut to 2 or 3? Because these are minor offenses, but these individuals, whether they're black, Hispanic, or white, are being punished an extra step. Because many employers won't hire them until they have a background check, or we need to address the drug culture in our neighborhoods. Because first thing, talking to our pastor and his daughter or relatives, does a lot of hiring, said the problem, and you have all these jobs available, but nobody can pass the drug test. And so those two factors need to be addressed, and nobody's talking about them, is the reducing that, they for have your license, your record expunged from 5 years, a long time. Because if you're 23, 22, you almost 30 before you can get a break. And the drug culture is messing up our community no matter where you live.
Yeah, that's right. So Harold, a couple points on that. Number one, I agree with you wholeheartedly. when I was at the Justice Department, I led a group that focused on reentry and dealing with the collateral consequences of people who want to work, and there's no reason that they should not be able to work and that there are these artificial restrictions on them. It's something we've got to definitely deal with. As a voting rights person, I believe that with regard to voting as well. And there's some movements afoot in Florida right now to address their problem with that issue, right? On the other topic here, I have had mayors of major cities come to me and say, Spencer, I've invested all this money in job training, and, you know, guy goes through the whole program. Then he fails the urine test, right? We spent all this money, he spent all this time, and then he doesn't get the job, right? I think that's a real issue that we've got to figure out a solution to. I don't think that it's about pointing fingers. I think that there's a policy solution, and it's incumbent on us to figure out what the policy solution is. I don't think it is people operating heavy machinery under the influence, but I do think that there is a policy solution that can help us figure out how to avoid and prevent that problem in terms of people getting back in that situation and relapsing.
Hi, I'm Rick Smith. Excuse me. I'm a physician in Detroit, right over here.
I thought you were a comedian here.
No,
That was
I'm
good.
not a comedian. No, not at all. Not at all.
That was good.
No,
You must
no,
keep
but I
your
will-
patients entertained here.
No, I'm okay. But President Wilson left me alone here with you guys, too.
All right, bro.
And I'm an obstetrician. See? I haven't had a lot of legal training per se and everything. I think the last class I had was taught in the basement of Dr. Julius Combs' house. And we had a little journal club here. The speaker was this young, vibrant lawyer with a big afro. I think his name was Dennis. I think his name was Dennis. Yeah, I think it was Dennis. Yeah, back there. And he came and talked to us about there. So this is my first class since then, and I do appreciate this. When you started out, you said there were 3 points. I would venture to say there's a 4th point you should have made, and that runs all through all of those things. And that was the power of knowledge and education. That links all those points that you talked about, because all that stuff is driven by knowledge, and knowledge is passed generational through education and in systems here. We have a problem with that in our country, particularly in our communities here. We put a lot of money into it, but it's not doing anything. My little legal experience, I know that some of the bigger cases was Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board of Education, the affirmative action cases in Michigan. All it had to do with education and the power to obtain that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. When that stuff happened in Michigan at that time was second only to Howard and Meharry in producing physicians. It's nowhere near that now. Mm-hmm. And that's the impact that these laws have upon our community. Mm-hmm. It's easier to become an NBA player or any basketball player than it is to become a surgeon. And in fact, in the last decade, we've produced probably scores of basketball players out of Detroit, and I can count maybe 1, 2 surgeons that have come out during that same period of time. It's just not in medicine. Mm-hmm. It is the pipeline to all these technologies that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. We've got great engineering schools right down the street here. Derek Scott's doing a great job at Michigan, trying to recruit African Americans with the skill at that level to get into it. Howard is producing great engineers, but we need more in order to take advantage of those things. Mm-hmm. So whether it's medicine, whether it's engineering, with all the high-tech things you're talking about, people want talent. Mm-hmm. And that talent comes from preparation, and it comes from education, and that's going to drive all that. I just wish you can comment upon what we need to do to get things going.
So I would just say that, I think lawyers try to do things in 3s, right, rather than 4s. So that's number 1 here, right? As opposed to just being objectively right. So I agree with you in terms of the skills piece. One thing I would say is, obviously we want to help people make a transition. But at the end of the day, education, skills coming to the table. People have talked to me, and we've talked a little bit about UBI, and there's some value in terms of UBI and some universal basic income, right? But my response has been UBI is not going to create Wakanda, right? The skills that you talk about, education, that is something unique in terms of bringing the table. That's what's going to create Wakanda. So I agree with you. Who's up next? You guys determine.
Good evening. You and Harold touched briefly about how drugs can impact employability. One thing that's on the ballot in Michigan is legalized marijuana. Have you been able to observe any racial implications with respect to legalized marijuana in other states?
We haven't focused or looked on in that in particular. We haven't. There's certainly been some people who have said, this is the future of work, and this is a cutting-edge thing, and you all should look at that if you're focused on future of work, but we have not looked at it yet.
All right, thank you.
Spencer, you're right on the money in terms of thinking about the three concepts. This past weekend, I was in Washington, D.C., for the National Association of Corporate Directors, our annual meeting. And it was about transformation and disruption and what's occurring. And speaker after speaker was talking about how computers are changing our lives and how things are going to change and what it is that we will need to have an appreciation for to be able to take advantage of it. You made some other point about 30 jobs where the majority of those of us of color may be employed or are employed. And one speaker talked about Uber, Lyft, etc., and how we all use it today. And he talked about how in New York, a taxi cab medallion several years ago was worth $1.3 million. Today it's about $130,000 because all of that you're going to be seeing a different approach. Coming back home, I've been appreciative of what's going on in our community, both black, white, as well as blacks, in terms of looking at opportunity for investment in our community. And just this week, there was a program that was sponsored by Black Enterprise at the Detroit Historical Museum, and the title was Money, is it black or white? And they had young people there who were entrepreneurs, who were in business, talking about what they did and how they are successful in their businesses and encouraging others to consider it. There is a path forward.
Thank you so much, Mayor Archer.
Spencer, first of all, I want to commend you. I mean, you are just phenomenal, great analysis, especially with the historical context, drawing parallels between the past and present. Of course, as you can imagine, very appreciative of it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Boyk, and I teach history at Wayne County Community College District. I've been there 14 years, and I've seen a lot.
And you were also a
Hamtone, yes, I was going to get to that too, of course. And I've seen a lot of changes over the last 14 years, and one of the major changes has been with online learning. A lot of our classes now are going to online learning. While that's a great innovation, we still have the digital divide with a lot of students not having access to computers. So what I want to know is, has your organization reached out to the community colleges throughout the United States, especially in urban America, to basically elaborate on the digital divide along with, you know, promoting community college education? You're talking a lot about entrepreneurship. That's one of the things that WC3 is promoting in terms of getting students options. And another thing I want to say too is you covered it. I would say about 80% of the students at Wayne County Community College District are working, and they are in these minimum wage jobs. They're going to be hurt, as you said. You know, so what can be done when they enter the realm of the community college? What can be done to keep them, you know, like focus in school, but at the same time, you know, they have to meet financial obligations. And I've had students who unfortunately had to drop out because they were taking care of family members, all that. So how do we basically, you know, keep hope alive with them and you know, keep them focused? So that's the question I have. What has your organization done with respect to looking at the community colleges? I know President Obama had an awesome initiative, you probably know, with community colleges, but what is being done to keep that initiative alive from your perspective?
Yeah. So, one, thank you so much for your service. I mean, you really are on the front lines with regard to, students and the future here. A couple points to respond. We're in the beginning stages of this, and I don't mean to sound too academic, but we have a survey in the field right now, and we're going to get results in October 15th that has a lot of questions about learning and interest in learning and community colleges and different pathways and the future of work. The reason this is a significant survey is we have an intentional oversample of African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and so there'll be 600 of each of those groups and 600 white, so it's a total of 2,400 people. That large sample size allows us to basically say, well, what do black women ages 25 to 35 who have incomes under $50,000 will have enough in that group to pull that out to see where they are in terms of these questions. So right now, we're really just trying to understand the challenges that folks face, how much they would spend on education, what kind of benefits they want from their employers. So we're in the beginning pieces of that. The one interesting thing we've done on this piece is that twice as many, not twice as many, but twice the percentage of African Americans as whites use their cell phone as their primary access to the internet because they don't have broadband at home. So this can be an important tool, and the numbers, there are more, a larger percentage of whites have home access to broadband, but in terms of this phone, it's about 77, 78% across the board in terms of Latinos, whites, et cetera, right? And that's really because of the low cost. I mean, you can get a cell phone, Maureen, for, $150. It may not be an iPhone, right? But you can get a cell phone that works and smartphone, right? So that's a significant factor in driving things.
Could you share with us what the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies is doing to share their research information? I remember years ago when Eddie Williams had your organization, you had the quarterly magazine Focus. Do you have that now? And how do we stay on top of the insights that your think tank develops? Okay. At the local level, we really need insights as to what the highest priority change efforts should be or could be that would work.
Well, thank you for that question. So we do not have Focus right now. I'd certainly like to start up. I thought it was a great magazine when I look back at old issues. I came in about 4 years ago and kind of dealt with some restructuring issues and some financial issues, and things are on the upswing from a financial standpoint at this juncture. We've got a monthly newsletter that goes out, so right afterward, hopefully we can be in touch and we can make sure that you're on the newsletter list. Right now, we're focused on 3 big issues, and the thought is kind of like Amazon starts with books and then you spread out to everything. We're starting with 3 issues. One is future of work in black communities. Second is congressional staff diversity. I think we're already the leader on that. We're continuing to go deep on that. That strategically helps us because it also gives us a footprint throughout Congress in terms of a web of people that we're connected to, right? And then we're doing a one-stop policy shop that's focused on issues that are emerging, like surveillance, like fintech, like
fintech?
Yeah, so this is financial technology issues, right? So if you think about, there are a host of issues where, so you think about the payday lender, right? So you got the payday lender who is charging a huge rate, right? And then when you leave the store, you might get knocked over the head with the cash in your pocket, right? Fintech can give you a different type of rating that may be more accurate, and you won't be charged as much, and the money comes to you electronically, and so it's safer for you. So the whole point is really, the bottom line is emerging technologies that can help communities, right? Thinking about those issues in that third bucket, right? And so let's please connect, and I'll make sure you're on our
If I could just
list.
follow through, Lane, if you don't mind, because at one time there were organizations like yours in D.C.
Right.
that frequently tried to develop insights to help people at lower communities develop a black agenda.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if there are any such efforts now. Do you know of any? I know the National Urban Coalition used to do a lot of that.
Right.
And there were other organizations. Is there any major national organization that's focusing on helping local
Right.
communities identify what priorities are for social change action?
Right. So here's what we're trying to do. In 2016, we brought together about 25 African American groups, including the National Urban League, NAA, just a variety of organizations, right? And we thought about what are the big priorities on a federal level, right? And we kind of had things teed up. You know, the ideas we have aren't receptive in the current federal environment, right? So we kind of pulled that together, and the Joint Center was at the center of that in terms of organizing it, right? What we're trying to do right now is work directly with the National Organization of Black County Officials, the African American Mayors Association, the National Black Caucus of Local Elected Officials, and basically help them. So as opposed to us being in direct contact with these elected officials, strengthening those organizations by giving them content, right? So we're not a membership organization, we'll be a policy organization. We'll be the think tank for these organizations and support them.
And how do their information disseminate to local areas so we know what's coming out of that intelligence?
Yeah, so largely they focus on their members. Many of those are electeds, that kind of thing. I'm open. We're just finishing up a strategic plan. The Ford Foundation was nice enough to support a strategic plan for us, and it'd be great to just talk kind of one-on-one and get some thoughts from you because frankly, from a strategic standpoint, and I'll just say this also from a money standpoint, right? There are a lot of foundations that say, okay, it's great that you've got the black elites or you've got a relationship with the pastors. What are you getting from the community here, right? And so, you know, we've got some things like some focus groups, and I told you about the polling, but there may be some other avenues in terms of really hearing. You know, I definitely think there's a role for academics and policy analysts, but I also think there's an incredibly important role, as Peter mentioned, in terms of community voices. So it'd be great to talk about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.
I would just like to sort of introduce into the discussion the idea of equality or the loss of opportunity for people being displaced by technology. But Detroit is academically now bottom in the nation in terms of our public schools due to the last over 10 years of state takeover. And the schools now, we've lost our funding for the future tax captures because we had to pay for Little Caesars Arena with that money. And I don't think that people really understand the structural inequality that's been baked into the new Detroit. And the opportunities that we're seeing, the difference between now and before is that there weren't this many rich white people in Detroit before. That's where the money is, and it doesn't mean anything to the regular people living in the neighborhoods. It doesn't, maybe there's higher income in Detroit, but it's not distributed across the population. People are still poor. The only difference is there's more people rich, and rich people are able to access things that poor people can't get, like their houses. So there's a tremendous amount of resentment and inequality, and there's also now, with this going on to 10 years, not even an expectation that there's going to be anything better, because there's an entire generation, the other person that teaches at Wayne County Community College, and those of us, the older people that are here because we remember things being better. There's a generation of people that are just completely waiting for a bus that may not come, that never had a driver's license, that have gone to schools that have been under state takeover. They have 45 students in a classroom, and this has been their reality for now 10 years. This is a real thing, and I'm really concerned about the future for all of Detroiters. And I'm gonna sort of combine the Latino community in here as well, because we're in the same boat in terms of the schools, but in terms of opportunity, it's really, really uneven.
Thank you. I really don't have anything other to say other than I hear you, and I think when we talk about the DJK scholars, I mean, like, this is like a purpose, right? I think it gives all of us purpose that there is certainly something for us to work on now that's relevant, that's not a waste of our time here. So I'm with you, and you know, these are the issues that we're trying to grapple with and get started on, and I look forward to continuing the conversation and getting your information. Hey. How are you doing? Okay. With my Uncle Dennis. Uh-huh. Was that Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, or was that before Frank Murphy? Okay, all right, all right. Okay. Right.
They haven't had access to legitimate experience of entrepreneurship, and they haven't had access to capital. What are you doing to address that lack of access to capital? And is there a study to focus on that particular issue?
Yeah, there is a study. It's put out, you may have already seen this. It's put out by a group called AEO, and it was funded by the Kellogg Foundation, and it focuses on black businesses. And one interesting thing is that like 54% of all black businesses are in just like 7 areas. So these like barbershops, beauty salons, house cleaning services, et cetera. By comparison, only 17% of white businesses are in these areas here, right? And so access to capital was one of the primary issues that was identified, and lack of access to capital. The average black business is less than 2 people. So it's not a mom and pop shop, it's like a pop, or it's just a mom shop, kind of thing, right? And so, and that's because of the lack of access to capital really prevents scaling here, in increasing in size. We're doing a piece right now on the use of apps by black and Latino businesses, and we will move in this area more as we deepen our work in terms of the future of work.
Give it a huge round of applause for our
Hey, Peter.